Hi, my name's Abayomi. I'm a techno producer based in Berlin, and today I'd like to show you how I use Void Eclipse Expansion pack and the Nacht Play Series instrument to create an underground breakbeat techno track. To lay the rhythmic foundations of my track with subsonic basses and hard-hitting drum loops, I'm going to use Void Eclipse. Then I'm going to turn to Nacht to create some hypnotic driving chords and effects that intersperse the composition. So let's dive in. The first thing I started off with is an impact from the Void Eclipse series. I use battery for this because it's a sample player and it's a really easy way of just getting sounds layered. So in this particular case, I had the impact from the Bayesian kit and a swell. And I just layered these two together because it just added a really nice contrast and a kind of an eerie industrial intro to the track. And the other main thing that was running through the track was the breakbeat loop. And this breakbeat loop was basically a loop that I took also from the Void Eclipse expansion pack, but in this case I used the bandpass filter to sort of give it a sense of distance. So the idea that as the track sort of progresses, that you feel like you're moving deeper into the club and you're getting more of the visceral sound of the drums. But this was like a little teaser, so you can just hear the sort of elements of the breakbeat running through a delay. And then the other part that I had was an interesting bass line that I also created just by creating a little sequence with the Bayesian kit again. And in this case, it's just a sub sound and a lead sound running together, but really heavily filtered with a low pass filter. So you have this kind of rumble feeling, sort of this deep sort of sub-sonic level, sort of adding to the tension as we move into the first break. Sounding together, you can sort of hear it sort of coming in and then moving into this short break section and then dropping straight into the breakbeat loop. And the main breakbeat loop, again, I took from the Void Eclipse pack. Just ran it through some processing, but it was already super edgy and just wanted it that sort of 90s aggressive breakbeat kind of sound. And with that, I layered a few more elements. So here I had the bass line, but then I also had a filtered kick, which was also coming from battery, where in this particular case, the filter kick was just rolled off slightly, but just to give it a little bit more of an edge with the drums from the breakbeat. I also added a high pass kick, which was basically using the battery VST, but in this case I used the high pass because I just wanted to have that transient sound and sort of interplaying with the rest of the breakbeat. Some basic hi-hats and claps to come in, and I had this kind of sweet sound which was also in battery, also from the Bayesian kit, and it was just sort of adding this other sort of weird rhythm, but I really liked how it sort of played together with the rest of the drums. So all in all, it sounded like this. It's already quite busy and a lot happening, and this was all basically coming from the Void Eclipse expansion. Now we're going to take a look at how I made the chords using the Nacht Play Series instrument. So at the beginning of the track, you can sort of hear the chords start to rise in volume and hit straight into the main part. And if I solo the chords, I basically worked with several instances of Nacht, and I used the Awake preset. And one of the things that I really like to do is to, when I have simple chords, is to work with modulation. So usually cut off and delays and reverbs, maybe also the length of the actual chords. And I'll automate this throughout the whole track because I think it adds this dimension of movement to something really simple, and it's looping and repetitive. But the other thing that I like to do is to add other layers. So I had this initial layer, and then I had a sort of second layer that is slightly more muted, slightly different processing, and also slightly different panning. But the other thing that I really like to do with the Nacht Play series is to work with the randomization. So I had another section, if I just solo that, where I just wanted to create another tonal variation, first of all by dropping it an octave, but then the second part was to use a completely different sounding variation of the preset, and I did this just using the randomizing button. Just by sort of flicking through this with the same awake preset, just seeing if I could find something that would fit tonally to the other sounds that I was layering. And this is just a fun, quick and easy way to sort of get a different sound. But what I really liked about it is the idea of paying an ode to sort of old breakbeat and drum and bass tracks where you maybe had different breaks that were sort of chopping in and out of each other. But this time I was doing this melodically. So you could always have these different variations of the same chord melodies that we're playing. Then I had two more sections that were using different presets, which is sort of very aggressive, industrial sounding, almost drum and bass edge bass preset called Dust Delirium. And again, mirroring the same chord structure. So it was just to add another sort of depth of layer, bass layer, you could say, to the chords. So all together it kind of sounded, again, adding more energy, sounded quite full. And then in the last section, I had another version of the Awake preset. And again, I'd use the randomization here to have something a little bit more muted and just to sort of round things off towards the end of the track. So now let's take a look at the last part where I used Nacht to create all the effects using automations. So I started the first effect, which is basically an ethereal pad, which was called the Calming Presence. The only difference I think I made here was, apart from adding the automation to sort of change the volume as it swells into the intro, was to adjust the jitter and sample rate macros, because I wanted to sound like an old school sampler. So it's something like coming out of an old S950 or something like that. And yeah, again, this sense of nostalgia at the beginning of the track. It's subtle, but I think it's quite effective. And to sort of intersperse that, I had this other effect called Acid, which I basically left as it was. I think I just made some small adjustments to the macros, but I just wanted this sort of rhythmic sort of countdown into the intro. And that sort of allowed it to sort of flow quite nicely into the first break. So for the next drop, I used a much sort of more visceral and stronger effect, which was called Race Whisper. And this was kind of really sort of full on with everything that you needed, sort of really sort of degraded, lo-fi, but at the same time, some sort of siren effect at the end. And this was all just one preset. So I just squeezed that in there and made sure that the automation for the volume was working nicely, because it was quite a loud sound, but I really wanted that sort of strong energy to come through in the middle section. So for the last section, I used two effects. The first one was called Mondschatten, which was a little bit more like this analog sounding synth preset that provided a swell as well as this really nice high resonance kind of squelching sounds. And the other one that I used to end the track was called Broken Clouds, and this one was really quite what the name describes, sort of really degraded and very bassy, but I felt like it was a really nice way to sort of end the composition with something that sort of brought it back down to earth, but at the same time kind of created this bed of lo-finess that I really like in most of my techno tracks, because I always feel like to have some of that retro vibe, even though you're doing a modern production, really sort of salutes the past, but also looks towards the future with sort of new styles of production. So now you have an idea of how I use the Nacht Play Series instrument to create all the different effects. All I did after this was add some processing and automation for the volume, just to make sure that all the sounds sit really nicely in the mix with all the other sounds that I created earlier. So my name's Abayomi. Thank you very much for listening to this walkthrough, and I hope you'll have as much fun as I did making your own techno bangers using Void Eclipse and Nacht.